Welcome back to Brighter Rays. This is a study called More Righteous Than I, and we're looking at Genesis chapter 38. Today we're specifically looking at verses 12 through 23 and the trap of Tamar here. So let's go back to our story here in Genesis. After the death of his two sons, Judah's wife dies. Now, after a period of mourning, he decides to hang out with his friend Hirah again, and the both of them decided to go to Timnah, where Judah's flock was there, and he's going to go shear the sheep. Now, this is a warning here to us because he had bad company, and he's got a time of sorrow going on, and mix those two together, can cloud your judgment. It can cause some problems here. So many people have done things that they wouldn't normally do in times like these, when you're sorrowing or you're hanging out with bad people. So you mix those two together, you really have a recipe for disaster. You got to watch yourself during those times. Well, by this time, Shelah was a young man and should have been married to Tamar, but Judah did not arrange the marriage, which might have been Judah's plan all along. Tamar hears that her father-in-law is going to Timnah, and so she devises a plan to force him to give her children. She pretends to be a prostitute and gets Judah to give her his signet ring, his cord, and his staff, all very personal and obviously identifiable things to Judah. They'd be very specific to him. And those were all given in pledge for the payment of a young goat from his flock. So he didn't have the goats, obviously. He said, I'll give you a goat. And she says, well, give me something to make sure that I get the goat if we're going to do this transaction. And so he says, okay, I'll give you my signet ring, which is very personal. It has, you would seal documents with that. I'll give you my cord and my staff. So she gets these things, and Judah agrees to the arrangement, and then sins with Tamar, and she conceives. Now, Judah and Hirah go to Timnah, to Judah's flocks, and he sends Hirah back to Nahum with the young goat for the payment. When Hirah gets back there, Tamar is long gone, obviously. He asks about where the cult prostitute was, and the men of the city say that they don't have one in their city. There's no cult prostitute here. So Hirah goes back to Judah and reports what happened. And Judah says, well, let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. Judah is saying that he doesn't want to pursue this any further. They attempted to make the agreed payment, but she wasn't there, so the matter's done. Besides that, he mentions being laughed at. What is he afraid of? Why is he afraid of this laughter? Remember all the different forms of laughter we've seen over the course of Genesis? Here's another. Judah's afraid of being a laughing stock. That's what he's afraid of. He does not want the laughter of shame and the despising of the people to be upon him because of what he's done. Judah does not want the shame of the people. He's not repenting of his sin, but just doesn't want to get caught in it, which is a problem with a lot of people. Right? It's not the same thing as repentance. Repentance is turning away from it. Right now, he's just busted. He's like, oh man, I got caught. So he doesn't want everyone else to know that he's been caught in his sin. So he wants to avoid that. So God, wrote shame into the heart of our consciences to lead us to repentance. But that doesn't always work out. A grief over a sin is not the same thing as repenting of sin. Repenting means you turn away, you leave the sin behind, you're not going into it, you're not doing it again and again and again. You hate that sin, you feel bad about when you do it again. So he's just right now upset because he got caught. And so that happens to all of us, right? But it needs to lead to repentance. If we feel shame about sin, it should release repentance of sin, of turning away from the sin, of stopping the habitual practice of that sin. And so we need to be aware of that. We need to look out. So when you feel that twinge of shame, you need to, I need to get rid of what I just did. That needs to go in the trash. That needs to die. So come back next time and we'll look at verses 24 through 30. And we're going to look at Judah's shame, but we're also going to look at God's grace.